everyone, and welcome to Burwood Group's discussion on remote work strategy and support. I'm Doug Burton, Executive Director with Burwood Group, and I will be your host and moderator as we run through this topic. Given our current events, the importance of providing a near seamless work experience for remote workers is painfully obvious to all of you, I'm sure. It's probably safe to assume that the majority of folks on this call are working from home today, so you understand. Just because it's important doesn't mean it's easy. And as such, I'm glad you could join us today to talk about remote work strategy and support. So first, let's start with the bad news. The fact that you're attending this call suggests your organization is likely experiencing challenges in providing that seamless experience. And there's no easy button to solve what we all know can be very complicated issues. In fact, the only easy button is what you got approved, funded, implemented, and prepared for in the previous years on the job. This would include the mix of tools, services, policies, processes, duct tape, and baling wire that you've called upon over the past few weeks. In today's discussion, we'll talk about how you can best utilize what you have in place already, provide some thoughts on how to extend and enhance those solutions, and finally, how to prioritize your next steps. While we don't know how long the current crisis will continue, one thing that's a near certainty is that this experience is going to leave a lasting impact on the expectations going forward for enabling and supporting remote workers. With that said, I'd like to introduce our remote work experts, Dave Patton and James Eastand. Dave and James, can you please introduce yourselves and give a brief overview of your areas of expertise?
Hi, my name is Dave Patton. I'm a principal consultant in our Unified Communications and Collaboration practice, and I've got over 20 years of experience in the IT field and collaboration field.
Hi, James Eastand. I lead our digital workspace group. We focus on application, desktop, and server virtualization. Also, application delivery controllers, including NetScaler and F5 appliances. I've been working with application virtualization, especially Citrix, for the last 22 years, and added on various other solutions such as Horizon View and Amazon Workspaces as they became relevant.
Thank you, gentlemen. Today we've allocated 45 minutes for the discussion. Our intent is to focus on what you can do now to improve your remote work support strategy. Dave and James will be walking through the recommendations, key questions to ask, and hopefully some actionable advice that you can take back to work with you today. So for those joining, welcome to this webinar on remote work strategy and support. I'll now pass it back to Dave Patton to start the discussion. Dave, please take it away.
Hi, thanks for joining us today. So as we've talked about, this is really around where you are today and your remote workforce, right? And so what we're looking at in this slide is really talking about what we've prepared for in the context of the number of participants, one to many, and then our different modalities, right? Text to voice and video, and all the categories within. So we're assuming that you probably have your email and your document access, defined for your end users remotely, right? But where you might be or might not be or struggling or have come around to is like document management and collaboration, like from a Teams client, right? And that could be Microsoft or Cisco or maybe through Slack or some other medium, SharePoint, OneDrive, right? Instant messaging and presence, right? So, the different applications that are out there from Microsoft, Cisco, Slack, and other vendors. And then voicemail, right? So everybody's got they can retrieve their voicemail, but do we put our voicemail on our endpoint, right? Do we actually do that single, inbox unified messaging experience? Do we have a compliance thing there, right? So where we see people actually struggling right now is in how do we get our contacts, center stood back up and active, right? How do we get our voice to transfer or have our actual phone or, a soft client available to us, right? What do we need? Then we start looking at video events like this and even training for if you rolled out one of these solutions in the context of, hey, what platforms do we have available? How are we going to get this message out? Or do we still have to do video events because we can't have groups, right, getting together, so now we've got to get video. That would also go along with group telepresence. So group telepresence could be more like, hey, we've all got these nice little high definition cameras at home if we've already got them because they're really hard to get right now. Or, we're doing personal telepresence one-to-one, right? And that could be through any number of platforms, right? These could be Zoom, they could be Microsoft, Cisco, they could be, other platforms, even from vendors that are HIPAA compliant, right? So personal telepresence for like doing DoxyMe, right? Or some other solution. So that's really where we see the struggle right now. And as we do this, the complexity increases, right? From one to many, from text to voice and video. And that's where, what you've got today may be extensible and really what we've been helping people with. So we're going to look at this, those are the modalities, those are the challenges, but really we've got to look at these through the lens of security, mobility, capacity, provisioning, and management. So some would say that provisioning and management are the same things, but in this case we want to highlight just a few nuances between them because we figure they're important. And really it comes down to what's your priority, right? You've got to prioritize these. So let's say you're a healthcare organization, or Sarbanes-Oxley is running your life. Sorry. The fact that you've got to have data integrity at rest, right? Or you've got to have encrypted video, right? So the security could override your mobility and capacity and negating your provisioning and management because you're security concerned. So that's really what you need to focus on first. And so this is really an exercise of how do you prioritize these things? And even then, each modality could have a different priority, right? So you could have security for data at rest, so for your document and management, and collaboration in that space. But your video, you're going to secure to a platform. It's not that big of a deal. So really, it's how do I get the mobility in place for that, right? Or do I have the capacity and scaling? So that's how we're going to go through this. And we're going to talk about each one of these layers individually in a little bit more detail. So security, right? Where are your data services and how do you access it, right? So are they in the cloud? Are they on premise, right? How do you access it? Do you access it through VPN? Do you access it using a client to the cloud, right? Those are really important things right now that we see challenges in, right? So James, where are you seeing this in the current environment, right? Where are data services and how you access them, and even protection?
So a lot of companies are looking at, currently our workers sit at a desk or a shared device and access data. And, there's been conversations of people picking up their desktop PC and taking home, or buying laptops to hand out to users and trying to leverage VPN. And the challenge is that, now that data is leaving the data center, we may not be making considerations for some sort of endpoint security on that device to make sure that, either that data can't be removed from that device, or, that data can't be printed or put on a USB drive, or that device lost, or whatever it is. So it becomes a real big challenge to protect that data. And so, we're seeing a lot of different responses. Some people already have some sort of remote access that they've been leveraging, whether it's VPN or Citrix or RDS or something like that, and they're trying to figure out how to go from a few dozen users to hundreds or thousands of users. And that kind of starts about that capacity and provisioning challenge.
Yeah. So exactly, right. How are we protecting our data? And it's really that desktop data aspect of it, right? A lot of us talk about voice communications, not needing to be, they're just voice, right? So really we're coming down to policy, right? Do you have security policies for your voice? Most of us talk over our cell phones, and that is what it is, right? So enabling a mobile application for voice isn't that big of a deal, or call forwarding isn't considered that big of a deal. really what I'm seeing is a video stance, right? People are like, well, I need secure video, right? I need to be HIPAA compliant. I need, different requirements for my video than I do for my voice, right? How do I protect that data? So, from a voice standpoint, I don't see where we're, in a collaboration standpoint, I don't see that being very difficult, right, from a security standpoint. But what I do see as a problem is the term, right, identity management, right? Our IDMs, our SSOs, right, our OAuth, authentication that we're using out there. Is it integrated into our platforms that we're trying to push forward, right? And so we're trying to make our end users experience more seamless by using a common identity management platform. But where we're finding challenges is we're having to, give end users, hey, here's your platform for this. Let's say you've got to enable something on the edge that's, not going to be integrated to your current identity management platform. So we've got multiple passwords going on, and we've got multiple policies. So we've got training that needs to be done, right? And in some organizations, that's acceptable. Others, we've got to get it integrated before we can push the tools out. So it's just that prioritization that I was talking about earlier. What's the priority? Was the priority getting the product to market, getting this in the hands of the users? Well, it might be a little bit more complex from an identity management situation. Or is it that we can't VPN? That's one of them, is that I can't get somebody to VPN in, and they can't remote desktop to change their password, so we have to use a common identity management platform. And we've had to enable SSO at the edge, right, to get that OAuth authentication, or we've had to use other methods to be able to have that OAuth authentication in the back end transition to the front, right, to the edge. So there's definitely that need for a common platform for identity management. Have you seen any identity management issues from a desktop perspective, considering that if it's the user's desktop, it's probably integrated already, or has that been pretty easy so far?
So it kind of depends on what's in place today. If there is no remote access strategy, we're really left with delivering what we have. Maybe it's Active Directory integrated authentication to some applications, and everything else is its own set of credentials. There's certainly products out there that will enable kind of SSO between various different applications and SaaS apps and stuff like that.
Any that come to mind that are easy to implement that could be an easy button? It's not an area of my expertise.
Yeah, so there's several different ones. A lot of times they're tied to implementing MFA, but there's Okta, SecureAuth, Duo. These are all pretty common solutions out there that most of them kind of focus on what they integrate with. Like Okta is really focused on SaaS apps. Some of the other MFA solutions focus on either Win32 application integrations or a combination thereof. How that authentication is presented to the user, whether it's a token or something on your smartphone or an SMS text. There's various different options, and that's kind of how you want to present that authentication layer to the users. It's generally a big deciding factor.
Okay, so maybe more of an MFA style, right?
Well, yeah, not only MFA kind of rides on top of it, but having that dual-factor authentication usually has a feature with it for SSO into applications. For example, we leverage Azure MFA and Azure AD. So most of our applications take our Active Directory credentials. When we log in, we'll get, authenticator token on our phone, and then that's the last sign-on we do for most of our applications.
Cool. All right. Thanks. Right on. So we're going to move on to capacity. So when we look at, mobility. So when we look at the next context here, right? Reading too far ahead. When we look at our mobility, right? So we're looking at where we are today, let's reiterate that. Where we are today is a lot of this is going to be based on BYOD, CYOD, bring your own device, choose your own device, carry your own device, right? Conversation. If you have not already enabled your workforce with laptops, with company-owned devices or some sort of MDM solution, right? So we really have to start looking at leveraging what end users already have access to. Many people, I don't know what the numbers are from Gartner, but I would fathom that it's in the very high 90 percentile of people in the world today have access to a smartphone that has some sort of an application store access, whether it be Apple or Google, right? Apple App Store, Google Play, or Microsoft, right? Microsoft devices and the Microsoft Store. And they have potentially a tablet, maybe a laptop, right? But we don't have the ability to manage those devices if it's not already done, right? So we're really trying to leverage the pros and cons here, the payoff. And it's really going to come from a data integrity standpoint. So if we're allowing access from people's personal devices, they're not under current company policy, right? How are we dealing with data integrity? And in some places, data integrity may not be, a top of the mind issue, but I'll go back to SOX and, like HIPAA, right? Those are top of the mind issues where they don't want you or they have limited access to that data without some sort of, a trusted back end on the system that you're using. To keep that in place, whether it be, a wrapper, a container, data encryption for data at rest on your device, how would you be able to enable that? Or what could you do for BYOD, right? So really what we're saying here is you got what you got. And we need to start thinking about how we can do business, continue doing business on a BYOD, CYOD kind of environment. So from a collaboration perspective, we start talking about some of the modalities of voice and voicemail and, being able to do IM and stuff like that. Once we start talking about voice and voicemail, we've kind of hit the limit on where we are comfortable with just giving people general access. And even voicemail into email can be somewhat of a compliance issue, right? Auditing and stuff like that. How do we deal with the endpoint? And then we start looking at IMs. Do we have to preserve those? Do we need some sort of thing on the back end to manage that, right? Compliance. So I'm sure if IM's enabled, you're probably already doing that, right? So really we're kind of looking at the collaboration tools as, hey, we're pretty good with these, but it's when we start talking about document management that we really start getting into this data at rest kind of issue, right? Because we're pulling a document, potentially we can pull it down and we can put it on our personal devices, right? And we can put it on our mobile devices. So this could be one of those compliance security issues overrides our mobility issue, but it's all about how do we manage that. So James, what applications do you see as essential and how do you make them available, right?
Yeah, so if we're talking about our corporate data hitting these endpoints that we can't manage, or at least traditionally have not managed, that's where we're going to be looking at products like Intune or AirWatch or Citrix, you name it. It was, oh man, just drawing a blank. Anyways, there's various different endpoint management products out there that allow us to secure part of that device so that data can live in that secure piece. It can be remotely wiped. It can be managed without impacting that user device. We can push out that client. Citrix Endpoint Management, there we go. So that would enable users to access corporate data, but should they lose their phone or laptop or plug in a USB stick to it to try to copy data, they can't do that. That data is protected.
So these are things that you could do. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
So these are things that you could do even without you. So say you send everybody home and it's just you IT planning session, right? Y'all are war rooming it. and you're coming up with ideas. Are these things that you could potentially implement? Say you've got certain factors. Well, you've got WAN, I'm pretty sure, right? And you've hopefully got some sort of an infrastructure to handle this, but like a couple of servers. What would you need to be able to handle this in a situation where everybody's at home wanting to work, you're wanting to give them work, and you're trying to figure that out? Is there anything that we can do in that space from a virtual desktop perspective to be able to enable this with compliance?
So if we start talking about a virtual desktop, suddenly our client device, the security of that device is less critical of that discussion, because now it is basically a TV to where our virtual desktop is, which could be in an Azure tenant, or it could be in your data center, or someplace where it's secure. So all I'm able to do is see the data. I can't actually, my device doesn't actually ever store it. That's going to be your traditional VDI or published application where that application and data exists in that data center or in that cloud tenant.
Okay. And these are things that we can enable remotely. Like, let's say our IT staff is not available to be on site too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the solutions support HTML5 clients or have a very lightweight client that is pretty streamlined to install. So we have a client-less option, or we have a pretty lightweight client that we can have our users put on their device to be able to access virtual applications, virtual desktops.
Cool. Okay. Thanks. All right. Well, we'll move on now to capacity, which for some reason I was really excited about that earlier.
Capacity is a big challenge.
It is a big challenge, right? And I get kind of excited about it. And let's be realistic, right, with your current environment limitations. I think this is a huge challenge just because I'm currently dealing with this with a very large county of 16,000, some odd people that work for the county, right? And they are looking at voice circuits and data circuits, and then how do we then access that? So we've got our layer 1 connectivity going in there with our layer 2 and 3 services, right? How do we bring that to the edge? Great, well, it's at the edge, but I've got an issue with my firewall. It can only handle so much bandwidth. So how do I deal with that? And then on the back end of that, I've got a VPN concentrator that can only handle so many sessions, right? So I know that they went and drove to Scottsdale, Arizona overnight, like a week ago. And, they sent a team of 4 people out to Scottsdale to basically strip some racks from some redundancy that they had built in the remote data center and put it all on the front end so we could handle the capacity for all these people going home. Now, while not everybody was deemed critical of that 16,000 some odd people, right, there is definitely 10,000 people, 5 to 10,000 that were deemed critical that we weren't sure, but we needed a plan because we were the IT leg of all these organizations that work for the county, right? And so this is the County of Orange in California. And we're with SAIC, the front end of this, right? And we have to plan for all these organizations. So then they start talking about, well, we'll just start sending, everybody in over VPN. I'm like, well, if you're concerned about your data, and we're talking about enabling remote IP phones and remote, Jabber, right, that's going to add to your data connectivity issues. So how can we deal with that? Can we move those edge components with a firewall off to like maybe a POP, right? To where we can just get one application going over that way, or maybe we need to look at our SIP trunks and do some more creative, single number reach kind of things. How can we do SNR and or call forwarding, and then maybe do that out of the SIP trunks so we're not robbing from our data environment? And then how do we weigh that out, right? Who's critical to get what component, right? And that's really kind of where the rubber met the road from a capacity standpoint. Everybody's kind of scratching their heads like, we're going to have to prioritize this, right? We're going to have to feel this out. And some of it, we don't know what we don't know about what this is really going to turn out to be, right? So be realistic with your current environment limitations. So what we've done is we've also started using cloud, right? How much of this cloud can we use, right? So a lot of the Office 365 environment, right, that's out there, and a lot of these other, WebEx and Teams environments, right, and Zoom that we're taking advantage of. And there's also free trials and offers out there for almost every company. I know WebEx and Zoom and Microsoft are all pushing, for, hey, let us get you in on trials. And even though it may not be what you want long term, it could help you fill the gap right now. But we want to think strategically. So we want to just not do a knee-jerk reaction, right? But we want to take advantage of trials that make sense to fill a business need and make sure that it's somewhat strategic with our long-term thinking. It could also be that you're looking to pilot some of these, and maybe this is a great time to do it. It's not the most advantageous thing to do at this time if you haven't already done it as a pilot, but it may be what you have to do, right?
Yeah.
So anything you can think of?
Yeah, so the interesting thing about that is, if we think about our, at home, with the exception of the few users out there that, are stuck with dial-up or satellite internet or, they just don't have good internet service, that's going to be a very small percentage. Everybody else, we can think from an end-user perspective, we've got almost unlimited capacity. So if we can offload where those users consume that capacity, the cloud, some of these challenges go away. If our, right now it's really popular to have a Skype or Zoom or some sort of message, just like a casual happy hour type chat with your friends. No one's really having bandwidth problems with that because, they've got several meg of throughput, if not a gig of throughput to their home. So if we start talking about all of our end users doing video chats but it not going to our data center, we might be paying some cloud consumption costs, but we're not using up our data center capacity. That kind of helps with that issue. If we can, anything we can take and put it between the end user's ISP and the cloud, we're not consuming capacity in the data center.
Sweet. Awesome. Okay. We will move on to what's also top of mind here with provisioning, right? So now that we've talked about on these last two topics of provisioning management kind of go hand in hand, right? And so, we can see managing it, our provisioning as part of management. We've broken them apart here on these two pieces, right? Because we feel like these are just more questions to kind of put out there, and we'll touch on them lightly, but not in depth, right? How do you provision these services to new users, right? So we've talked about BYOD, CYOD. There's application stores available out there for you to push these things. So we just need to figure out how to configure them for use for you. And many of these applications that are BYOD, CYOD, compliant, give you flexibility to send people links and to configure the app or, available on store. Your on-premise component, right? So how do we get SCCM or some other component to push it, right? Then we need to consider the speed versus packaging. So instead of packaging something, how can you send a, speed, get it out there, get a link to somebody, here's how you install it, right? Or start working with people over, terminal services sessions or WebEx sessions to, hey, we've installed the application, let's configure this for you, right? So we'll have to weigh those things. And then how will you communicate the availability to the end user, right? How do you do that end user communication and potentially end user training, right? So we're going to talk about real quick the management, right? How will you manage users remotely? There's this CYOD, BYOD challenge, right? Thankfully, there are tools that we've talked about that are HTML5 compliant or commonly available, right? Say it again, Teams, Zoom, WebEx, right? Other platforms that are available. Those are just some of the top three, right? How will you manage your premise-based solution remotely, right? Is there a concern of, hey, we don't have our IT folks, how are we managing these things, right? Help desk support. How are you funneling those calls to your help desk? So probably a telephony challenge and a data challenge, right? So our contact center, and then the knowledge base and knowledge transfer. So really what we've talked about in the previous slides really come to the provisioning management part that aren't really prioritization, but they're top of mind and they're key questions that we're being asked, right? So I highly encourage our attendees, and thank you guys for joining us for this session. We're not quite done yet. This is just before we take questions, is
if you've got questions about provisioning and management or anything else, please, type them in the Q&A, raise your hand, or send us an email, right? And let us answer that for you. Let us help you out here, because this is designed to be, what can we do to help you, right? Just kind of like a mind share.
And how can we leverage automation? How can we leverage automation if, as opposed to having to provision to 10 users, we're provisioning to 10,000, right? That becomes a man-hour problem.
Absolutely. Yeah. So sorry. Yeah, absolutely. It's how do you do that? How do you provision? How do you manage that? So it is absolutely a scaling issue, right? So James, any thoughts on provision and management outside of that?
Other than finding ways, to automate some of those tasks and leveraging cloud where we have infinite resources, seemingly, or leveraging tools out there that are already SaaS or cloud enabled. So to make that provisioning conversation easier, make it a smaller impact.
Sweet.
Cool. Thanks, guys. If there are any questions out there, please do use that raise hand icon, and we'll figure out how to unmute you, and or please type them into the chat session. All right, so with that then, we had some questions that we pre-staged here to jump in. So if there's any of these that are of specific interest, we can prioritize. Otherwise, we can just have you guys run through these. Dave, go ahead.
Sure. So do you have tips for prioritizing all these new requirements? How do I decide what to start with? So James, I'm going to throw that over to you.
So the first thing I would say, first we have to consider our compliance and requirement, our compliance and regulations. If there's anything that we have to strictly follow, that's got to be the top priority. After that, it's probably time from design to delivery to the end users, because we all want to move very quickly right now. A solution that's going to take us 6 months to deploy or 3 months to deploy isn't timely enough. And then it's just whatever specific to your business. It's going to be a personal prioritization for each company.
Cool. Yeah, and we've been, from a collaboration standpoint, we've been dealing with that. How do we prioritize these things? And it's exactly that. It comes down to, what's required for your business to function. First, compliance and security, right? Mobility, and then what tools do you have available, and how can we time to market, right? What's important, what's priority. And in some cases it's been, hey, I really need to get my help desk out because they're calling in with questions about COVID, right, from a healthcare organization. I've got doctors' offices and the healthcare at the county and other places that are just mostly concerned about getting those contact centers moved. Because healthcare is continuing to operate, but they need to get these folks home, and so they're not gathering, right, if they don't have to. That's been a huge push for us, right, is how do I get people home and get their stuff enabled, and how do I forward that collaboration? And then document management's been huge. How do we keep our workflows going if we're not in an office? But I think that's been a strategy that, can be worked from multiple angles. So, I get lots of questions about VPN help. How can I quickly address that? So what do you think, James?
So a lot of companies already are able to support a small number of VPN users, whether it's just a couple people in the IT staff or maybe there's some select remote users. The first thing we have to talk about is what are those users, as we expand that, what are those users consuming? What is our bandwidth capacity? Since these users are connecting directly into the data center, if we're doing, either sharing files or a voice call or video call, kind of calculating how many users we have and what that average consumption is going to look like, and are we prepared to handle that capacity? If we're not, then we need to prioritize who gets to consume what kind of bandwidth. Phone calls are going to be pretty important for everybody, but video calls may not be. Maybe we limit that to certain use cases. At this point, it's kind of about control, leveraging, controlling what users can use, so we don't, have one user take away from another.
Yeah, and so we've been dealing with like edge stuff, right? So, hey, how can Microsoft has their client in the cloud, but it depends on if you're using that, right? So like Teams or Skype, right, for business, which is fortunately coming to an end. And then we've got like our edge stuff, right? So we've got some Jabber on the edge, and then folks are using VPN for like Slack and other things, right? So if you don't have VPN, there's also like the Citrix stuff and the remote desktop stuff that you were talking about, right? That could circumvent the need for VPN. So I see those as ways of addressing that, right?
Yeah. So I want to talk about the performance issues at home. I think this one's got a kind of an interesting use case. We have a hospital we've been working with that has used Citrix for a long time. It's very pervasive in their environment. Users consume it all the time, so it wasn't a big change for them to have those users move remotely. They had adequate infrastructure, adequate bandwidth. The problem they're seeing now is their home connections are not as reliable as what they're used to when they're in the office. All the local ISPs weren't expecting an increase in consumption from home users. Now we've got everybody watching Netflix and playing games and trying to do video calls, and suddenly these ISPs are getting a bit oversubscribed. So that's an interesting challenge. And I think kind of what we can do there is just level set expectations with our end users that this is going to be a little bit. It's going to require a little bit more patience. It's going to be a little bit more unpredictable because it's no longer, a hardwired connection into the data center is pretty darn reliable. But then as we move farther and farther out, that reliability starts to drop, and just kind of setting that expectation.
Sure. And I think some of the things that I've had to, address and not me personally, like, I'm not worried about me playing an Xbox at home, but I had talked to my sister yesterday and I was like, yeah, how are you managing that, right? Because her kid, like one of her kids wants to play Xbox, the other wants to watch YouTube videos, and, she's having to do video chats, so she's a teacher, right? And she works as a professor at University of Dallas, and she's having an issue with being able to get quality video going. And she had to tell the kids, like, hey, mommy's on a video call. You're going to have to chill out and go find something else to do. Go play with some blocks or draw or something, right? Or watch a video we already have, right? I mean, like, because your performance at home is going to be largely contingent upon what you're doing at home. And I think all of us have kind of that thing where we're having to have some work-life balance, and it's actually affecting our homes, right? So, those are hard conversations and things to do, but, it's kind of the time we're in right now, right? You're right, everybody's getting oversubscribed. And I know everybody's working on the back end, right? All the big folks are working on the back end to increase capacity and give people more, and not throttle and that kind of stuff. So
it's been impressive. It's been impressive what Zoom and Teams and WebEx, what they've been doing. We've had a couple minor glitches here and there with the various products, but it's been, audio wasn't working for a couple minutes. They got it fixed. It's been astonishing how quickly they've been able to scale up and handle, hundreds of thousands of people consuming those products all day, every day now.
Yeah. And even the home stuff, right, like Charter and, Verizon, all those, and AT&T that are providing home service are doing the same thing, right? So it's crazy. So what are most businesses, we got like 1 or 2 minutes here, so So, the most common threats to business right now, what should I be worried about protecting? This is a really kind of a long in the tooth thing, so we're just going to make it quick, right? There's going to be so much scamming right now. There's so many people out there trying to do malicious things at an awful, and take advantage of folks, phishing, and all the stuff that you've talked about. So my words of advice here, sage advice, would be, refresh people on, hey, if you see something, say something. If you're worried about something, raise your hand and ask IT. So IT's job may even be becoming more about even protecting people's personal devices because they're accessing corporate stuff. So you may become, an IT organization that has to be pushing the agenda of personal security, how it could affect your work, right? That's an awesome point. With that, I think we're wrapping up here.
Yeah, so James and Dave, one thing I would like to mention that we didn't touch on is there's a lot of vendors who are making special offers available to you. So if you haven't reached out to evaluate all those things that the vendors are doing to make your life easier, definitely worth spending a little bit of time doing the research on that, because there are temporary stopgap measures being put in place that can potentially help everything you're doing. So congratulations on your gaming software. That's fantastic. So we'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. We will be sending out the recording and the presentation deck to you by Friday. And if you do have any follow-up questions, please feel free to contact us directly. All of our contact information is on the screen right now. We're here to support you if there's any way we can be of service. So with that, we'll wrap it up. Thank you very much for joining Birdwood Group this morning, and we hope you each have a successful and, more than anything, healthy day. Thanks, everyone.